1942 forced the Japanese to send carriers to the region to protect any further advances. To cover his next operation, Yamamoto allocated only 2 fleet carriers and a light carrier to seize Port Moresby. For his part, Nimitz was prepared to send all 4 of his operational carriers to the South Pacific, but the raid on Tokyo held up 2 carriers, leaving only 2 to deal with the massive Japanese incursion into the Coral Sea. The resulting first carrier battle was a very confused affair, with both sides having and wasting opportunities to launch an all-important first strike. When the preliminaries were over, both sides finally struck the other's main carrier force on May 8, 1942. The exchange was deadly, but the pre-war notion that carriers were extremely vulnerable to air attack was proven incorrect. One American fleet carrier was sunk and another damaged. Japanese losses were much heavier. The light carrier was sunk, one of the fleet carriers bombed and heavily damaged, and the second fleet carrier had its air group so attrited that it was considered by the Japanese to be incapable of operations. Thus, of the 11 IJN carriers operational before the battle, only 8 remained available for the next, and most famous carrier battle. The Battle of the Coral Sea was just a preface to Yamamoto's major operation the following month. This operation was targeted on Midway Atoll, but was actually focused on annihilating Nimitz's remaining strength in a decisive battle. Through a series of astoundingly bad decisions, the remaining 4 Japanese fleet carriers were actually outnumbered at the point of contact against Nimitz's 3 fleet carriers and the many aircraft stationed on Midway. Using exquisite intelligence and insightfully positioning their carriers where they could strike the Japanese, the Americans pulled off the only successful ambush during any of the war's carrier battles. Despite major issues in coordination and communication that threatened to derail Nimitz's ambush, fate placed the Americans' most powerful weapon, their dive bombers, over the Japanese carriers at the point they were most vulnerable. The result was the bombing of 3 carriers within the span of minutes, all of which later sank. A single remaining Japanese fleet carrier acquitted itself well, heavily damaging an American carrier that was later finished off by an American submarine, before it was also sunk. The Battle of Midway was not the kind of decisive battle that Yamamoto was planning for. At its conclusion, the IJN's offensive power in the Pacific was blunted. But it was not the end of the IJN's carrier force, as is often suggested. Following their victory at Midway, the Americans were quick to seize the strategic initiative in the Pacific. To protect the sea lines of communication between the United States and Australia, and to begin the counteroffensive to recapture Rabaul, which had become the main Japanese bastion in the South Pacific, American attentions turned to the South Pacific. The hastily prepared first American offensive of the entire war selected the island of Guadalcanal in the southern Solomons for invasion, because the Japanese were building an airfield there. Control of this airfield was critical to the outcome of the campaign, which stretched to 6 months and extracted heavy losses from both sides. During the campaign, the Americans used their carriers to defend against major Japanese efforts to recapture the island. There were only 2 carrier battles over the span of 6 months. In the first, the Battle of the Eastern Solomons, carrier forces of equal size fought a very cautious and indecisive battle. In the process, Yamamoto's first poorly planned attempt to throw the American invasion force off the island was defeated. The second carrier battle was the result of the largest Japanese effort of the campaign to retake the airfield with a land offensive, and then destroy American naval forces around the island. This encounter, the Battle of Santa Cruz, is the least well understood of the war's carrier battles. It was also the only time during the war that the Japanese carriers gained a clear victory. However, in doing so, Japanese aircraft losses were so high they were unable to follow up their victory. Throughout the battle, control of the airfield on Guadalcanal was the path to victory. The Japanese were never able to suppress the airfield for any extended period to allow them to move large ground forces to the island and supply them for an offensive to capture the airfield. Carriers on both sides played supporting, but important